This is Collected Clan Episode 1.
It's the weed out for me, where I know the things that I don't want are more important than the things that I do.
Welcome to Collected Clan, the podcast about outstanding people I've met along the way. People with interesting stories, triumphs, ideals. People who've made their mark in the world and in my life. I'm your host, Gregory Byerline. I've met a lot of people over the years, and many people come and go. Shakespeare wrote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances." But these people are the company that you keep. Everyday people, just like you and me. I am talking with Amber Williams. Amber and I have known each other for, good Lord, what, 10, 11, 12 years?
Yeah, I was going to say it's at least 10.
At least 10, because I think it was 07 or 06. That first time we shot together up in that awesome studio that I miss dearly.
I moved here to Nashville in 2006 to go to school at Vanderbilt. That's actually what brought me to Nashville. And one of the most interesting things about that is that I had no interest in fashion whatsoever, really, when I came into Nashville. But I was getting a clinical laboratory science degree. And while I was in school, my interest switched a little bit, where I was just mostly wanting to get to know some people in town because I was new to the area. I didn't really know anybody. My class was 5 people, and we were with each other 5 days out of the week, 8 hours a day, and it just made it where it was really hard to kind of get to know new people. So I got an invite to, I guess, audition, if you will, for a runway show that was being held to benefit the American Cancer Society. And when I got into that, mostly just to sort of kind of, like I said, get to know some new people, kind of just get myself out of my very introverted shell. Since I came from a very small town, I just sort of grew up very introverted, very shy, very quiet for the most part, and wanted to challenge myself one more step to sort of get myself out of that little bit of a personality trait. So I got into this audition, and I, of course, was booked for it, and it was a fun show. I got to know a bunch of people in the fashion industry. It was the very kind of almost the beginning stages of Nashville was getting started, having runway shows. They were doing little pop-ups at that time. And mostly what got me into the fashion industry was, one, I was at that event and I actually walked in the shows, but what really kept me in the industry was actually the photographers. So I had a few photographers come up to me after that show and were wanting me to actually try to do photography, like actually sit in for some photo shoots. And so I was like, all right, like it's one more thing for me to just sort of see how I do, because it wasn't really something I had interest in doing. It just didn't fit my personality, if you will. So I just ended up doing a couple of shoots, and then after that, it just grew from there.
That's crazy, because you have clearly met that challenge, because when I think of Amber Williams, I do not think introvert. I mean, I know you're a small town girl, farm girl, or countryside girl. Were you raised on a farm? Like an actual farm, like with animals?
Yeah, we had a farm. We would raise a garden every year. I know how to put up tomatoes, put up corn, you name it. I played in cotton trailers. My grandfather had land that they grew cotton on. My parents were not farmers per se, but we had cattle. That was about as close to farming as I got, being a country girl. But we had a 15-acre farm that we, had our own garden and lived off of that for the most part for my whole life. So I was organic before organic was cool, I suppose. We grew our own food, so I guess that's kind of a nice little start.
That's awesome. Man, 15 acres of Middle Tennessee. Man, what I'd give for 3 acres of Middle Tennessee right now. So you challenged yourself to get out of your introverted shell. Clearly that worked. Who were some of those photographers that you worked with back then?
It was definitely you, and then, oh my goodness, I'm blanking off. You had put me in on that question. Oh, let me see. Who was it? Shannon Fontaine was actually the first one that we did a photo shoot there at his place, one of the lofts I don't know how we ended up coming across that location, but that was the first shoot ever. And then your shoot, then let's see, I've worked with so many people. Michael Howard was one of the first ones that was in sort of the beginning stages when he was shooting film. Gosh, it's been so long. Those were like in 2008, if I remember correctly. Gosh, I need to write them all down.
There's only a few photographers in Nashville.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I mean, there's
quite a few of us.
guitarists and photographers. So out of those runway experiences, that's where you really fell into the fashion scene?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, it just went from getting to know more models, finding out what models were actually doing in town. It was very word of mouth, just sort of my photos would end up on Facebook, and then people would see them, then another gig would follow. It just is sort of the domino effect, as in how it kind of usually works for a lot of things. Musicians are this kind of a similar parallel. You just get your work out, and people start to see what you're doing and what you're capable, and then they just sort of call on you.
Right.
But mostly I did freelance for the most part. I had some few little contracts out just to take care of the bigger gigs, but I did walk for the Symphony runway show a couple of times. Marquesa, Monique Lelouillet, gosh, those were great. But those were my 800 people watching, and I got a little too nervous. I was like, okay, this is fun, but I don't really know if I want to do it much longer.
Right. Those symphony shows,
yeah.
Did you walk in the Oscar de la Renta show?
Oscar actually is one of the ones. I did go to the audition, and they were really sweet, but Oscar would not see you unless you were at least 5'9" or taller.
Right.
So I snuck in on the other ones, but because of my walk, but
yeah.
And I'm a little bit on the shorter side, so.
Yeah, and I've struggled with that. I don't want to say body type, but those physical requirements or wish lists. I've struggled with that philosophically for the longest time, and I kind of get it now. It still bugs me, but having photographed models and non-models, just everyday girls of all heights. I almost hate to say this, but there's a visual difference. It's just a proportions thing.
Yes, yeah.
And that's just frustrating as all get out, especially now that I've got two daughters of my own. I didn't think about it even once back before my daughters were born, but once I became a father of daughters, everything in that realm just really gave me pause. But I kind of get it. I mean, runners have a physique. Football players have a physique. Tennis players have a physique. I don't know. I guess it's just a thing. There are people who defy those traditions and customs and excel anyway. But I don't know. It just always really bugged me.
Mostly, I believe it was just because certain yards of fabric would cost so much money to make that they wanted to use as little fabric as possible, so they got small, skinny people. So I think that's mostly what started it, is that you'd have this $1,000 a yard garment, and you want to use as little as possible because you don't know if your buyers are going to buy it or not, and you want to make that one piece, save your money where you can, but still present a wonderful product for someone to, really judge what they're buying. So they literally had, skinnier people require less fabric. So that was mostly, I think, their mentality. And then, of course, the longevity of I don't know, they change out the ages and everything. Of course, you've got France and all of that. They've started to do their weight requirements, BMI requirements. It's been neat to see the shift of that requirement, or what is sort of expected, and what is seen as okay and normal, I suppose. Mm-hmm. It's definitely changing. That whole world is most certainly changing. It's nice to see the diversity is, definitely improving as well.
I agree.
It was very straight-laced, like one set cookie cutter for a long time, and I'm glad it's switching up a little bit.
Well, what are you doing in the fashion world these days?
Well, I started, of course, in front of the camera, and then sort of lost not necessarily a love of that. I have a shoot tomorrow, for example, but I wanted more to offer than just one thing, I
Hmm.
suppose. I have one thing to offer. I have one look to give to whoever wants to book me for whatever or whatever project. And so I just looked at it as I wanted to keep my options open. I'm also getting older, and I basically wanted to still stay in the industry, but I knew hair and makeup were not my fortes at all. And I just kind of, well, thought on it for a hot minute. And I realized that I was always bringing my clothing to shoots, of course. They kind of, when you do these shoots and whatnot, they like want you to bring your own to have backups. Most stylists do, at least. So a transition basically happened where I was like, well, why don't I just try wardrobe styling for a little while? So I called on all of those photographers that I knew, and I basically was like, hey, this is what I want to do. So now I'm actually more behind the camera than I am in front. So I do wardrobe styling now. And for about 2 years there, I was styling models for Amex and iModel Management, basically just doing their development books, where it was very minimalistic styling, just trying to mostly present the model of what the model can do for their books and portfolios. So we kept it pretty basic. And somewhere along the way, it finally dawned on me how much of a music lover that I am. So I have now switched to focusing mostly on musicians. So I'm wanting and styling musicians these days.
And there are a few musicians in this town.
Just a few.
So if you're going to
Just
focus
a
on that,
few.
this is a great place to do that.
Yeah, it's been interesting for sure.
What musician shoots have you styled that have become like album packages? Are there any that uh, we would know?
April Cry has done one, and then Selena, we just did hers here recently. But they're mostly it was like I did a video, sort of a more of a wardrobe edit for the band Red. It's an alternative Christian band. We did that. One of the first things I sort of did, brought that in. But I really kind of just gotten started, if you will. Still no big names yet. You know how it can be,
Yeah.
but not, haven't got that far yet.
Yep. Is that something still on the front burner or is it side burner?
It actually it comes and goes, which is kind of random. I still love my day job. 100%. And I think if I had a little bit more of an apprehension to go to that every day, it would probably be more of a push for me to stay in the wardrobe industry, but wardrobe and music industry. But I honestly, I love what I do for a living, so I dip into it back and forth. I have love-hate relationship slightly with it because it isn't easy. It really is not an easy thing. Wardrobe styling requires a lot of load in, load out, pre-planning, returning or shipping. It's a lot of risk involved, financial risk. You're taking $1,000 garment and putting it on somebody, and then you're kind of turning it loose and hoping nothing happens to it. So sometimes it's got a lot of risks, and it's got a lot of energy is required. And when I do a 40+ hour work week, I fit it in where I can, I suppose. But yeah, I do the full-time job. But I have, like I said, a love-hate relationship with the styling, just mostly because it is a difficult industry. One, slightly to get into, and then second of all, just to do in general. It takes a lot of effort.
I've always been intrigued by what you're calling your day job. I know the scientist side of you. Well, let me back up. I know that the scientist side of you exists, but I don't know the scientist side of you.
So probably
Like,
explain a
yeah,
little more of
like
what.
what
Yeah.
exactly do you do?
So I for 6 years I did bone marrow and stem cell transplants at Vanderbilt. So I went in as a trained generalist. That's what I trained when I was at Vanderbilt. I could work in any lab that you can think of. And when I trained and did that, I specialized in the stem cell transplants. So I was seeing cancer patients. I was doing their bone marrow transplants. We were doing their cord blood transplants. And that was like one world that I lived in for about 6 years. And then now I've switched to what we would consider more the front side of the cancer fight, while the stem cell transplants were the back side. We came in at the last minute when nothing else was working. We were the ones that came in to just sort of see if we can make it happen. We could give about 5 to 8 years on a person's life with the stem cell transplants, but now I'm on the front side of the cancer fight, which is more seeing if chemo is working. We're helping diagnose cancers. We're helping figuring out what exact cancers people have. Right now, I'm in the electrophoresis and hemoglobinopathy testing. So that is going to be your blood disorders like sickle cell disease, thalassemias, alpha thalassemias, C disease, which is another hemoglobin variant where your red cells just aren't doing the right, like making the right type of hemoglobin. And of course, hemoglobin is actually what transports your oxygen and iron and whatnot around your body. And if that's messed up, then you're not getting proper oxygen. So it's an interesting little flip flop, I guess, from Vanderbilt to where I am now. But so I do basically I'll run some like lab tests. Like I literally am pipetting, I'm centrifuging, using test tubes. You know, if you ever had blood testing done at all in any capacity, we're the ones that test it. That's what a clinical laboratory scientist will do.
And how did you get to that field from 15 acres in Middle Tennessee?
Well, it was a
What's
little
the
bit
connection
of
there?
a challenge. I say challenges, and when I was a senior in high school, I had no other idea of what I wanted to do other than I knew I wanted something science, and I knew I wanted something medical. So I didn't want to go to med school. I kind of did more of a weed out, I suppose, in figuring out what I wanted because I knew what I didn't want mattered more than what I did. So for me, I was like, I'm definitely not going to go to med school, but let's just go ahead and keep it general. I even thought of the idea of being sort of a Jack Hanna version, female version of Jack Hanna and doing like the safari videos. But my personality, again, was still very introverted. So I never wanted to get in front of the camera because it scared me. Now
See,
I would
but
probably love
but
doing
but Jane
that.
Hanna, you as Jane Hanna, I could that makes sense.
But yeah, so basically, I ended up deciding to do a biology degree to keep myself with my options open. For some reason, I like to have my options open. So I did a general biology degree at UT Chattanooga. And while I was there, there was one man that was very influential to a lot of things for me. He was three different things. He was my boss at one point because I worked in the micro prep lab, and then he was my advisor, and then he was also my teacher. He was my professor. So he was sort of very, very much involved in my life in those 2 years that I finished up my degree at UT Chat. And he was interested because he was like, you're really enjoying working in the micro prep lab. Why don't you go and why don't you go and shadow these people at the hospital? And I'm like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I knew I needed to specialize in something. That's welcome to the medical field. We have to have a license, of course, to do whatever it is that we do. But so he basically put me in touch with one of the hospitals in Chattanooga, and I went and I shadowed some of the MTs. They were called MTs back then. They're now CLS now. But I went to shadow them, and I actually hated it. They were in the dungeon basement. They were in like an old lab, and I'm like, this is not for me. Like I feel like this is very closed off. I just didn't even like it at all. But what ended up happening was I went home for Christmas break, and I also knew that this field, this clinical laboratory science field, they worked in clinics as well. So like you could pretty much work wherever you wanted as long as there's lab testing. And so I ended up calling one of the clinics in town, and I basically said, hey, can I come and see what you do every day just to kind of get another different perspective of the same field. And I went and I shadowed, and I absolutely loved it. Completely different environment, completely different setting. There's just something about it that just sort of spoke to me, I suppose, about being able to do the field, because it's a slightly intimidating field. You're going to have to learn a lot of things. You're basically going to the first 2 years of med school with no medical degree to show for it. And you have to get into the program. You have to actually interview to get into the program. So it was very intimidating to choose that field, for me at least. But we ended up, that advisor was really the one that kind of pushed me in that little direction because he was observant enough to see what it was that I liked. And he knew that I loved the immunology. He knew that I liked the microbiology. He knew that I liked doing the lab work itself, and that I took genetics lab just because I wanted to, not because I had to take the lab. So he was very observant And I hope everyone has one of those people in their lives that just pays attention, because that was really beneficial for me to kind of help guide me through the rest of my career even. But had he not recommended me go shadow, I probably never would have done it, or even known the field existed, to be honest with you. I would have never noticed. Like, no, every time I tell somebody what I do, they're like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. Then you explain it. They know exactly what you do. But it was an interesting route to get me there. But that's basically how I ended up here.
So you did undergrad at UT Chattanooga
Hmm.
and graduate work at Vanderbilt? Or did you,
Well,
is it
it's
two
actually
and two?
just yeah, it's actually a second bachelor's from
Oh, second
Vanderbilt.
bachelor's. Okay.
Yeah, so it ends up being two different ones, but they all sort of lead to the same place, I
Sure.
suppose.
Sure. So when for the first 6 years, you were with one group of scientists, and then you changed directions to the front side of treatment.
Yes,
Was
cancer.
it the
Yeah.
same group? Like, did the group itself change directions, or did you change to a different group that had a different
I
focus?
just completely changed jobs.
Ah,
I
okay.
went completely changed jobs. Yeah. I left Vanderbilt completely.
Wow. So what's the day in, day out for you? But what are some like massive breakthroughs that you've not necessarily discovered, but because of your work, so and so is still alive? I mean, is it that kind of impact?
It was when I was at Vanderbilt.
Okay.
Now, so much it's more of a, therapeutic sort of monitoring type of testing that I'm doing. When I was at Vanderbilt, either the stem cell transplant worked or you died. To be honest with you,
Wow.
we basically napalmed their bone marrow, and they had no immune system when they went through that chemo. So when we gave them back their cells, they either took or they didn't. So that was a little bit more,
No pressure.
more intense. Yeah, no pressure at all, right? Yeah, yeah. Don't infect anybody with anything crazy. It was pretty intense, but I don't know. I found while I was in school that the blood bank was one of my favorite classes, which is very very intense choice out of our field. I enjoyed the intense, the stress, the requirement, the oh gosh, high energy. Those were the things that I realized that I really enjoyed while I was going through the program at Vanderbilt. And then the stem cell thing just sort of fell in my lap, because the boss that I ended up having, she invited me to come for an interview. And she sent all of us in my class a very intimidating email of basically, hey, if you do mess up, you're going to kill somebody. So that kind of sent some people not wanting to go to the interview. For sure. I mean, it was pretty involved. But I ended up specializing in that. But when I do now, it's more monitor based. We're trying to make sure that the chemo is working. And even then I don't have anything to do with that. It's more of the pathologists that are going to do the more interpretation side of that. I'm just cranking out the volume actually for them to look at. So it's a little more factory based now, if you will, lab wise, where I'm at now, but I don't mind it.
More room for error or
There's more,
less drama if there is error? Is that
now
accurate?
it's still, now there's more volume. It used to be that you would work on one patient for 4 hours at Vanderbilt. Now I work on probably 100 different samples at a minimum throughout the day. So there's more chances for error for sure. For more than one person. So like before it would have been just messing up for one or five people. Now it's messing up for 100. So you have to be very, very good about watching your numbers, watching your names, watching your volumes and dilutions. And it's still hands on, which I enjoy. It's not just putting a sample on a machine and walking away. What my bench is very specific about doing exactly what we do, which is, we have to actually manipulate the sample, which is more risk. You can always mix people up, or it's just you have to stay under. There's no autopilot, is the way I like to describe it.
I mean, healthcare obviously has been in the news for the last, oh my gosh, what seems like forever. So with
Hmm.
all of the changes and additions and takeaways and changes, and then we'll give you this and you can't have that and all that stuff, how does that impact what you and your company does, or does it?
It's more of how much a patient probably pays for their lab testing that's going to affect it. It's more insurance based for us, where
Okay.
if insurance is not going to pay out more, it's now going to fall on the patient. So it's all lab testing, basically. Like I said, from going to have a CBC blood work, any blood work done, any micro testing done, anything like that, immunology, where we find out if you have malaria or anything crazy. It's very dependent upon what's going on with the insurance companies. What are the insurance companies able to give out? Because we don't really necessarily increase our prices, if that makes sense. We have this kit that costs X amount of dollars. We have to make a little bit of profit. You know what I mean? Like it's more based off of, as long as our stuff is being paid for, because these kits, that's where lab testing is so expensive. You have multiple degree people doing the testing in the first place. They have to be paid. Then you have the lab kits itself, the equipment. Gosh, some of our equipments are in the $100,000 for one analyzer. Like, it's ridiculous how much this equipment costs. And of course, all through regulations, and then solutions and everything. And shipping costs, because we get reagents sent to us by mail. It's a lot of money that goes into lab testing, and a lot of people, unfortunately, don't know all of that extra stuff. So they're like, "Why is my lab bill so expensive?" But there's a lot of things it's paying for that are kind of factored into not only just the test, but the actual knowledge that went into reading the test, because we all, like I said, we go to 2 years of med school for the most part to do what we do. It's expensive all around, but mostly it's just how it translates to the patient is how the insurance is going to pay.
So wherever the political football lands, your livelihood and your work is not necessarily affected one way or another.
For me personally, well,
Right.
raises maybe, but aside from
Okay.
that, no, it's more, we're kind of at the mercy of what goes on above us at this point. Like if they want to do, raises or not, it's more a company based, not necessarily government based, if that makes sense.
Yeah. As I say that as if anything government related makes sense, but I hear what you're saying.
It definitely affects us, or it affects everybody, but not technically directly, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, that's fascinating. I don't know why this is not something you and I have talked about before. I knew there was some level of scientist to you and about you, largely from a blog you had or still have, the DNA Stylix. That's how I knew that you were more than just an external aesthetics interested in fashion. 'Cause
Yeah,
when I
that's
saw
what
you
got me into
post
Fashion
articles
Week,
on
actually.
like the scientific connection to fashion, I was like, "Oh, now okay, no, this is interesting. Just because it was a new perspective, it was a new level. Are you still doing DNA Stylix?
I still have it. I guess in a nutshell, a real brief synopsis of it. It's a play off the word DNA helix. So it's like decoding the DNA of fashion instead of DNA in general, genetic genome, all that.
Gotcha.
So I just kind of made up this little word, DNA stylix, off of that. It started basically because randomly I had a detached retina. Random, but I had a detached retina, and for a month I had very, very, very horrible vision. I couldn't wear contacts. I didn't work for a month. I couldn't see for 7 days after the surgery. So I needed something to do that I could kind of get my mind. When you have nothing to visually focus on, it's amazing how much your brain will just go crazy. So I needed something to do during that little time period. And so I kind of came up with this little idea. I was like, well, why don't I merge my two loves and put them together? And that's where the blog came from. And what really also kind of stemmed it, that whole me actually creating the blog and actually going through the process of building the website and all of that, was that I had plans to go to Fashion Week in New York. And at that time, blogging was really getting going, and I think this was in 2013, I want to say. It was when it was really getting started, and it was, bloggers were getting into shows to see the designs and everything. And I was like, well, I'm going to go to New York. I want to go see these shows. One, I have an appreciation for fashion, but they're not going to let me in just because I want to see the pretty clothes. I need a reason. I'm not a buyer. I'm not, I don't own a boutique or anything. Like, there's no reason they would let me in. So I was like, well, let me just create something that will give them a reason to let me in. So I created the website, created a blog because, of course, a lot of bloggers were getting into shows. And I wrote on that for about, I think, 6 months. And then I just sent the website on to them when I sent out for it to see if I could request for some invites into the runway shows. And I was actually really surprised at the response that I had, because the designers that invited me to their shows were very science based. So it's not only it's every area of science that you can think of. So it's technology, it's astronomy, like anything science, because that's just kind of what my brain naturally drives itself towards. So for me, I would see a design go down the runway. So this is the concept of the blog, is more a comparative blog where I would see a design and then I would personally see something different aside from just, say, the color green. It would be similar pattern to, like, say, a malachite stone. So I would see that, and that was actually on one of Monique's runway shows. Was that stone was her inspiration, and so that stone's pattern was put into her fabric. And anyway, I ended up writing this blog, and I had maybe quite a few little articles on there, just basically taking the picture of the runway show, runway shot, and then I compared it to what I thought it looked like, and then I would also include a little bit of scientific background about what it is that I was using to describe the garment. And it ended up being that it was like 3OS4 ended up inviting me to their show, and their show was all designs that were 3D printed or laser cut leather. That was sensational. It's absolutely sensational to see that go down the runway. Every single piece was just completely done by a computer. And then another guy, I ended up sitting by the man that created the software, the designs that they used to actually print the garments themselves. It was all this, computer technology went into it. The laser printer went into it. It was incredible to watch it. All of this science and technology be used to create a garment. And so I started to see the patterns. So it was a number of shows that invited me to see their stuff, and they were very science-based. Either they were inspired by, I don't know, roots or something. Like, they would end up getting me into the show because they had a natural affinity for nature and brought it into their show, and that's where the parallel ended up coming in for me.
I think that's fantastic, and you're probably the only fashion blogger out there who could even make those connections.
Yeah, I'm definitely a nerd. I definitely am a nerd. We had radiolarians in one of them that was kind of neat. There's like these protozoa in the ocean that most people are going to be like, what? But yeah, I just read a lot of science books growing up.
Well, that's awesome. Well, they paid off. I will use that when inspiring my kids to read. And unfortunately, Molly just devours books. And Margot is close to learning to read on her own, and she'll devour books as well.
That's awesome.
I will use this as an example of, see, this is why you read. This is
why
we're going to turn the television off and we're going to read.
Sorry, I was going to say that's one of the reasons why I created the blog. It was actually kind of my way of secretly keeping girls in STEM, which actually stemmed literally another avenue of doing lectures for the Adventure Science Center. So they actually brought me in to talk to the 5th through 8th grade girls to keep them in the science fields, science and tech fields. So that was actually kind of interesting. That blog brought me to that world as well. But that was really, I was just more interested in just keeping people interested in science and saying, hey, you can like fashion, but you can also like science as well. And you're actually liking science whether you realize it or not. That's mostly where the blog came from.
Yeah, that's very cool. So is the blog still up?
The blog is still up. I can't quite, it was a lot of work went into it, and I can't quite completely disband it. I have these moments where I know I see things and I'm just like, man, I really could write an article on that. But the other things have been so time consuming for me that I rather spend it doing, actually being on set as opposed to sitting and blogging. But I do enjoy doing that. I really do need to bring it back.
And what is the URL for that blog?
It's just dnastylix.com, dnastylix.com.
Hopefully you'll get some traffic and some future inspiration to make some more of those.
Yeah, definitely. I love doing it for sure.
The couple posts that I read, I mean, it has been a few years since you've really been active over there, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
I took a big break.
Good, because I'm glad that you haven't been active like for the past 5 years, and then I just missed it all. But back then, when I was full-time freelance photographer, I would come across them a little more often. And then 5.5 years ago, when I went in-house and kid number 2 came along, my available time for doing that sort of thing just diminished and diminished and diminished. So I personally lost touch of that, but I'm glad to hear that it hasn't happened since then. So
No,
I didn't
you
really
haven't
miss
missed
much.
anything. No, you didn't miss anything. I just started focusing on other avenue. Like I said, actually doing the wardrobe styling took up a lot of my time. So it just sort of went by the wayside for a little bit, but it's still there. It's still a passion. So I need to just sit and write some more articles.
Yep, and until that happens, then the previous work is still out there, and people will find it and leave it out there in the world library.
Exactly.
Let's take a quick break for a word about an organization that Amber supports. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society exists to find cures and to ensure access to treatments for blood cancer patients, like Taylor Carroll.
My name is Taylor Carroll, and I am passionate about LLS. When I was 11, I was diagnosed terminal with a rare form of cancer, ALL leukemia with Philadelphia chromosome, and was given roughly 2 weeks left to live. My family was thrown into an emotional tunnel, and we were lost. We looked for any form of guidance, of hope. And for us, LLS was that. They helped guide my family to the center of treatment, and they helped fund the research behind my treatment. By the grace of God and research funded by LLS, I beat my illness. I'm 100% cancer-free now, and I am passionate about helping the cause and ending cancer. I travel the country now as a singer and a spokesman for LLS to raise awareness, funds, and inspiration. Getting to work with LLS has been one of the most incredible blessings of my life, and I can't wait to be a bigger part.
Learn more about LLS at lls.org. So you and I, aside from fashion and interest in photography, we share another wild love. Mine is sleeping on the floor here, and that would be dogs.
Oh, yeah.
Are quite easily one of the best creatures on the earth.
Just a little.
Dog people unite.
Yes. Yeah, I unfortunately do not have a yard with a fence, with a fence. I'm gone a lot with the medical field, of course. We have long hours, and sometimes I travel, and so I'm single, so I actually I have foregone the whole having a dog in my own life. So I make up for that by going and volunteering for the Humane Association by walking theirs.
Awesome.
And just sharing as many dog memes as I possibly can. That helps me out too.
Yep. I'm definitely glad you did that. We got our first dog Sunday from the Nashville Humane Association, so they will forever hold a dear place in our heart. And rescue dogs in general. Clementine, our second rescue here, is an amazing girl, and she is still out like a light. Usually I can say her name and she'll perk up, but she's curled up into a ball. She's twice the weight Sunday was, but she can curl into a ball the size Sunday was. I've yet to figure out how she folds off.
Yeah, she has long legs.
Yes, and it's crazy because it's like there's a hidden joint that she just scrunches them up. So what is it about dogs?
Oh gosh, being
I could
that,
talk about
of
dogs
course,
forever. So
yeah, I was gonna say, being that I, of course, grew up in the country. I grew up I'm an only child, so for me, my playmates were actually my dogs. They were the first dogs I ever had were a pair of beagles that were my dad's my dad's hunting dogs, and so I had them, and then a couple of random dumped out mutts ended up on the farm, and they ended up taking up residence as well. And then, of course, one of our favorites was our dog Huckleberry, that was also a dumped out little runt. She was barely weaned when she showed up, mangy and just had seen better days and starving. But she was, I don't know, she won our hearts on that one. And she ended up staying with us for about 16 years. I had that dog for a long time. But mostly it's just, of course, you've got the psychological nature and the chemistry nature of what happens when you're around animals in general. They're going to, decrease your, blood pressure. They're going to make you feel more relaxed. They're going to calm you down. They're stress relievers. They're comfort dogs. Of course, that's why they're in the comforting feel that they can be in. But dogs to me, they just, I don't know, something about them. Like, they make me smile. And like, one of my favorite things is to see one's head outside the car window. I mean, it's an immediate smile for me. And I know that's not for everybody, but I just always loved them. I've always had stuffed animals that were dogs when I was a kid. So for me, they were just fantastic to have had, walked 100+ dogs at the Humane Association. So it's to see their personality also is kind of intriguing to me. They're just like people. Sometimes they'll be kind of like cats and they don't want you to bother them, or be, just the most loving things you can ever find. But they that's just it. They're very loving, and I love anything that's gentle, has a gentle heart. So dogs are my people, I suppose.
Yes. Well, there's a reason dogs or cat spelled backwards doesn't spell God. Speaking of mirror images, if you literally reverse the letters, then you kind of have a clue into the origin of where dogs come from. That's what they are.
Yeah.
So I want to get a little more personal here, because you have mentioned that you're single. When I first met you, you were single. Then I remember you getting married, and you and I share a wedding photographer. I don't know if you knew that or not, but Alan shot my wedding back in almost 20 years ago. This coming May.
I actually don't think I knew that.
This coming May will be 20 years for Megan and me. Yep. That's actually how
and I think your wedding date is actually my birthday.
May 16?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Well, look at that.
It is. Yeah.
And then single again, being the intelligent woman that you are, you think, you post, you share, and you've been rather vocal about what it's like being single in today's modern world. And I don't want to say it's funny, because I don't want to say it's like, the curious thing about it is I read those and I was like, you know what? I don't have a clue what you're talking about, because I literally have been married for almost 20 years. When I see something like that, and I've got a few single again 30-something friends, I kind of feel like Tom Hanks when he's re-entering the dating scene in Sleepless in Seattle, and just the humor. He's like, I'm so out of it, and I have no interest in re-entering the dating scene. So that's not where I'm going with this, but. It's like I read the struggles that you girls are going through and just the crap you have to deal with, and I'm just like, really? Like, that's even a reality?
Yeah, it's interesting because, like you said, it's been a while. It's been a while since you've been in the dating scene.
Yeah.
It's the same for me. I was, married for 5, with him for 7, and then it's been, a year out, 2 years out of divorce. And so it was just interesting kind of getting back into the dating world, because of course it's been probably 10 years since I've been in it. And it's definitely got its interesting parts for sure. Things have changed where just common courtesy has changed. How women are, we don't get picked up for dates anymore. We have to meet them somewhere usually. There's no have to, but that's usually the norm, the understood norm. This has changed. Of course, all the dating apps now exist. That wasn't really around too much, or wasn't very popular 10 years ago for me. So, like everybody now has an option B, waiting in the wings, it would seem. It's definitely been interesting. I mean, I really can't even say that I've really set forth and specifically went out to go dating. I don't do that. I don't really put that restriction on myself. I feel like things should always somewhat happen organically. And so the dates that I have been on, or the people that I have dated since the divorce finalizing, they were all mutual friends of, well, I'm sorry, friends of my friends, basically. So I was introduced to them through friends. Usually, that's how I kind of like to do things. I don't really do the dating app scene like a lot of people are trying to do. I think that's up to everyone's personality, more or less. I was on, I think, Bumble for 3 days, and I found it to be rather overwhelming. So I was like, this is not for me. So I'm just going to stick to the meeting people through friends and see how it goes. Usually we're doing things that we enjoy, like going to concerts and that type of thing. So I'm very much on finding someone that kind of enjoys the same things I do. Not all of them, of course, but a few mutual likes to kind of make things more interesting and more easy, I would suppose. But especially definitely be interesting.
So when did it change that it is now expected that you don't get picked up for dates?
Probably when like at some point while I was married, I didn't even notice. I never even remember seeing friends talking about it, but it really is now. It's more or less from my understanding, at least what little I've been in the dating scene, it's very much you show up at so-and-so bar or so-and-so coffee shop and you meet each other that way. I don't know if it became like a safety thing. I don't know where it really started, but it basically,
that was my
like,
first
nobody
reaction
picks you.
was maybe,
Yeah, because
I'm
I
not
mean,
sure I
if
want
you're
you to know
meeting
where my
people,
house is yet.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm kind of wondering if it's a little bit of that, because if you are using a dating app, of course, you don't know if the person you're meeting is really who's on the picture, who's in the photo, or who's or who they say they are. So you could, it's an easy way to get trapped into something that you're not aware you're getting pulled into. The catfishing thing, for example, apparently that happens a lot. But yeah, I would say it was probably maybe a safety thing that got switched around somewhere.
Yeah,
Because like again,
I can
you're
wrap my
meeting
head around that.
through,
But if
yeah,
it's
because you're meeting through the internet, and that way you don't know what you're really meeting. So it makes more sense to be a little bit more safe, meet in a more public area. I can see that's where maybe the switch happened.
okay, I can buy that. But if it's because guys have lost the art of chivalry and being a gentleman and all that stuff, that's where I'm going to get my feathers all ruffled. But as the father of two daughters now, and also with a son who I'm going to raise what I believe to be the right way, if dating apps are even around in 40 years when my kids start dating, then good Lord, yeah, I wouldn't want, I don't want them meeting somebody online and then, oh, yeah, here's my address.
Correct. Yeah,
So that makes
that would
sense.
be my first guess. Yeah. I've never really thought about it until you just brought that up. I'm like, why did this switch?
Well, you mentioned that, and I instinctively was like, "You mean what? You yeah." It was just crazy. I mean, that's how far out of the game I am. Thank the good Lord, and that's how much times have changed since Megan and I started dating in '97. Wow. So, what's been the biggest thing you have learned transitioning from married life to single again, and then dealing with all of the single stuff you have to do? If you were giving a talk at an Adventure Science Center weekend when you had STEM girls there, and you could talk about not only the science but life, and like really get into hear their stories and offer some sage advice.
Ooh,
What are
that's a
some
good one.
what are some life lessons that you know now that
From
you want to pass down?
dating life lessons, I suppose. Gosh,
I mean, it could
probably,
include that, but
yeah. Again, I've said it earlier, but mostly it's the weed out for me, where I know the things that I don't want are more important than the things that I do. And what I mean by that is, if I don't like smoking, that's going to be kind of like a deciding factor to whether I want to date someone or not. Now, granted, they can always stop smoking, for example, but I
yes, they could
found
always
that
change.
the negative qualities, yeah, I was going to say, I just found, like, say, the negative qualities matter a lot more to me than finding the more minuscule things. I would say having an interest in music is one of my key things. And if they don't like live music, I've actually gone on a date before, and the guy said that he did not like live music, and I was like, oh my, I'm gonna go to concerts all by myself for the rest of my life. It's kind of a no, brainer, I guess. I
How is
suppose, in a
that
way,
guy
'cause-
even human? I mean, who doesn't like live music, for crying out loud?
Yeah.
And
It's
live
just
in
too
Music
loud.
City.
I'm like,
I'm
wear
like, really?
earplugs. Yeah, exactly. So I was a little taken aback by that question, but I'm sorry about that statement. So I was like, yeah, I don't know this is going to go very far.
You're like,
Um,
wah, wah, wah.
yeah.
Check,
And I guess
please.
also is that because I have dealt with loss and a number of facets, from an apartment fire, losing everything, from a standpoint of having to start over again, the divorce itself, losing that life, losing a second life, for the most part with the apartment fire, having to start over randomly. A lot of loss, a lot of family members have passed in the last 5 years. My biggest advice also is just, if you're dealing with any kind of loss, whether it's a loss of a job, a loss of a sibling, a dog for that matter, anything, whether it's a loss of a boyfriend or friendship, a loss of a dream. I've even had that kind of thing happen. One of the best advice I have for that is very much understanding the grief spiral, where in that grief in general is going to be, it's not linear. It literally won't just constantly just be a straight line. It's going to, if you consider grief literally on a spiral, it's going to go away and it's going to come back to you at random intervals. And I'd say the most important thing that I learned out of that is that it's really tight. It's a tightly wound spiral in the very beginning. But then as time goes on, that spiral unwinds, but it does come back at random, but it comes back at longer intervals in between times. But to know that it's going to come back around is the most powerful thing, because you know that, okay, that's that moment where I'm going to remember somebody because a certain song came on the radio. Oh, there's that moment of grief. And then you can work your way through it, and then you can move on and go about your day. So that was my biggest thing to learn, was because of so much loss. It was very crucial for me to understand that there are those moments where grief is going to hit you out of nowhere. That loss of whatever is going to come back around. It's going to hit you on a day when you're tired, or it's going to be that song you hear on the radio. And it was very much, it was so helpful to know that, because when you know it's coming back around, you can brace for it a little bit better than the last time. And it does get better. I know it's one of those little numbing things that sometimes it won't ever go away, or it may never go away, but it will get lighter and easier to understand and know that it's going to come back at some point.
That's pretty solid.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, well, yeah, that makes very good sense. That's pretty solid. Thank you for sharing that, and super cool proof on why you are one of my people.
Well, you're one of my people as well.
I mean, it's crazy. I'm sitting here thinking, trying to put the date on that very first shoot we did. And I mean, it had to have been 10, 12 years ago. And, life is layered. People are layered. And even over that, we'll just call it 10-year period, that, I mean, I learned something about you today that I didn't know. And I think that speaks to how important it is to collect people along the way, not as objects, but as treasures, valuable treasures, and continue learning more about them and all that cool stuff. Believe it or not, we must have had fun because time flew by.
Exactly.
But thank you so much for being you and being super cool and smart and giving and creative and all of that.
Oh, thank you.
Super awesome stuff. Keep doing what you're doing with the dogs, and I applaud you. I don't know how you do it as much as you love dogs. But I'm glad that you recognize that you're not in a situation that would be a great living environment for one dog. But that just means that all of the dogs out there are yours, even if it's just for hey, I'm going to take them for a walk. One day you'll get a place where you can have one curled up on the floor here, gone
I'm sure.
to the world.
You can just house sit.
That too.
Till I get to that point.
Yes.
I'll dog sit.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. It's good catching up with you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, this was super fun. I appreciate the conversation.
There you have it. If you enjoyed this, subscribe and share with your friends. Go to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. Search for Collected Clan and subscribe. See more in the show notes for this episode at collectedclan.com/Amber Williams.
And a big shout out to my friends Worldwide Groove Corporation for this episode's original music. The song is Mimosa from their album Chilladesiac Lounge Volume 1. Check out more of their music at worldwidegroovecorporation.com. Now go be you.